and First Lady Jill Biden are visiting New Orleans to grieve with relatives of the victims of the deadly New Year's Day attack. We'll have analysis on the legacy of former U.S. President Jimmy Carter's connection with Africa during the Cold War, at a time when some countries were fighting against white minority rule. And U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's plan to slash government spending and how past American leaders tried to do the same. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin our broadcast in the United States, where President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden are visiting New Orleans on Monday to grieve with relatives of the victims of the deadly New Year's Day attack in the city's popular French Quarter district. 14 people were killed and 35 injured when a man identified as 42-year-old Shamsuddin Jabbar drove a rented pickup truck at high speed through the entertainment district as revelers celebrated the first hours of 2025. Authorities say after the vehicle crashed, Jabbar got out and opened fire on responding officers who returned fire and killed him. Investigators say Jabbar acted alone but was inspired by the Islamic State to carry out the terror attack. The Federal Bureau of Investigation says that Jabbar, a veteran of the U.S. Army and Army Reserve, posted 5 videos on social media expressing support for the Islamic State terrorist group. Now, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is leading the probe into the New Orleans attack and says the assailant was inspired by Islamic State. VOA's Arash Arabasadi has this story.
Closed-circuit video captures the moment when 42-year-old U.S. Army veteran Shamsuddin Jabbar rammed his truck into crowds of people early New Year's Day in New Orleans. A black Islamic State banner was recovered from the truck, prompting the FBI to investigate this as an act of terror. U.S. President Joe Biden says federal agencies are investigating all possible links.
Federal law enforcement and the intelligence community are actively investigating any foreign or domestic contacts and connections that could possibly be relevant to the attack. We're going to continue to relentlessly pursue ISIS and other terrorist organizations where they are, and they'll find no safe harbor here.
14 people died in the attack and dozens were injured. Jabbar suffered a fatal gunshot wound after opening fire on police. The FBI says Jabbar stashed improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, in drink coolers, one of which they say he placed at a busy intersection. The Department of Homeland Security says this is another case of what it calls homegrown violent extremism.
It is a very difficult threat landscape, and it is why that we as a community, not just the federal government, but state and local officials and residents, need to be alert to it and take the precautions necessary to avoid violence from occurring.
Later on New Year's Day and more than 2,000 kilometers away in Nevada, U.S. Army Green Beret Matthew Livelsberger drove a rented Tesla Cybertruck to the Trump International Las Vegas Hotel. The Clark County coroner confirmed the highly decorated Livelsberger, whom officials say suffered from PTSD, died from a self-inflicted gunshot before the truck exploded. Officials say no one else was seriously hurt. Law enforcement says there are so far no links between the attacks. People in New Orleans held a party-like vigil for the victims of the New Year's Day attack. President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden plan to visit the city on Monday. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
Residents across much of the United States are in the grips of a major winter storm that forecasters say could produce some of the heaviest snowfall in a decade. The northeastern Atlantic states prepared for a major blizzard that covered parts of the Midwestern U.S. with heavy snow and dangerously low wind chills on Sunday. The National Weather Service says at least 20 centimeters of snow was expected across the states of Kansas, western Nebraska, and parts of Indiana, with winds gusts of up to 72 kilometers an hour. The U.S. National Passenger Railway Service, Amtrak, canceled select train trips from Sunday to Tuesday throughout the Northeast and Midwest. Air travel is also becoming difficult, with many Americans heading home after the Christmas and New Year holidays. Now let's go to the Capitol Hill, where a joint session of the United States Congress is convening on Monday to officially certify the 2024 election, which officially names Donald Trump as the next president of the United States. Previously an unknown procedure, the meeting gained international attention in 2020 when supporters of the then President Trump tried to stop Congress from certifying the election results. For more insight, let's go to VOA's Anthony Labruto, who is standing by live at the U.S. Capitol. Hello, Anthony.
Hello, Vincent. How are you?
Okay, now let's start by what exactly happens during the joint meeting today.
Absolutely. So really, this is an all-day event here for Congress. So first, the United States House of Representatives and Senate will meet separately in a quick meeting, which is happening right about now, for just a quick overview of the day's agenda. And now, really, this whole day's agenda will be the certification of the election. And so, about 1 p.m. local time, Eastern Standard Time, both the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate will convene in the House chamber to certify the election results. And so, what that certification actually means is that the Electoral College of votes, which are votes that were given by the states to on behalf of their populations to now going to the United States Congress, will then be certified by both those houses. So they are brought in actually physically in boxes, and they are read aloud, each state one by one, to the entire House and Senate chambers. And so they will then certify them and confirm that each state was in fact the present victor for the 2024 election. Interestingly enough, though, is Kamala Harris will be the one presiding over that actual certification process, and you'll know that she was in fact the loser of the 2024 election. But certainly throughout the rest of the day, it's going to be really those votes being read aloud and tallied.
Anthony, how has this process changed the procedure itself changed since the last one?
Certainly. So, as you remember and as you mentioned in the intro, in 2021, supporters of Donald Trump had tried to object to the certification results 4 years ago. Certainly, a lot of national security event is being taken place here. Officials are actually declaring this now a high national security event, which allows them to call in that much more security, National Guard, Capitol Police, to really reinforce this democratic transition in case should there be a repeat of last time in an objection of the results on state-by-state basis. Certainly, as President Jimmy Carter will be coming in, lying in state here. There will be a presidential funeral happening later this week. There was an attack in New Orleans actually earlier this week, certainly too. So a lot of things to worry officials, but by that designation of a high-level security event, this will give officials all the more preparation, all the more resources they need to really conduct this peaceful transfer of power without any problems.
Now, what's next? What are the next steps for Congress and the incoming administration?
So once Congress actually, they will spend the rest of the day actually certifying, reading the electoral votes results aloud throughout the entire day. Once that happens, really the last big event will be the inauguration. So Kamala Harris is expected to, at the end of the day, certify the entire 2024 election as going to Donald Trump, naming Donald Trump and J.D. Vance the president and vice president of the United States. But then actually at the inauguration, they will be sworn in as the president and vice president of the United States, replacing President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Brilliant. Anthony, thank you very much. Here's Anthony Labruto reporting live from the U.S. Capitol. Now, 6 days of official funeral ceremonies marking the life and legacy of Jimmy Carter, the 39th U.S. president, have started in his home state of Georgia, where VOA's Ken Farabaugh has more.
Sun rises over Plains, Georgia, differently these days for shop owner Philip Kurland, as he and others in this rural community of about 700 people mourn the passing of its most famous resident, Jimmy Carter.
We were hoping we were going to be planning his 101st birthday, but the realization is he'll be with Rosalind. He'll be in a far better place, and he's really done as much as he can for the community and for the world at this point.
While he was known by the code name Deacon to the Secret Service officers who protected him for nearly 5 decades through more than 140 different countries, Jimmy Carter is more than a former president and humanitarian to those who lived alongside him in the place he called home for a century. As Carter's hearse and motorcade made its way through the town at the beginning of 6 days of funeral activities, Curlin reflected on Carter's personal impact on him.
There goes my hero.
It's the beginning and the end.
Jill Stuckey is a Carter family friend and superintendent of the Jimmy Carter National Historical Park, which includes his Depression-era boyhood farm outside Plains, where the funeral motorcade paused on its journey through Georgia.
So a president starts planning their funeral the day after they're elected. This has been planned for decades.
A plan Stuckey and others are faithfully fulfilling as Carter's flag-draped coffin made its way through Georgia.
I haven't grieved yet. I'll probably grieve when it's all over with.
Kim Fuller is Jimmy Carter's niece, the daughter of his well-known brother, Billy Carter. She's also his neighbor in Plains and carries on his legacy at Maranatha Baptist Church, where Carter taught Sunday school lessons since leaving the White House in 1981. While she admits the funeral activities are keeping her busy, there are difficult moments of reflection.
Something just kind of flooded over me. I'm saying, we're doing this because he's dead. He's gone. And I had to go outside, so there are moments when it hits me just overwhelmingly.
As members of the U.S. military stand at attention at Carter's flag-draped coffin at the Carter Center in Atlanta, thousands of visitors like Atlanta resident Walter Ramsey have one final opportunity to connect with Georgia's only president.
I wasn't alive for his presidency, but this really helps make it feel like Jimmy.
People will continue to pay their respects to President Carter in repose here at the Carter Center until Tuesday. That's when he'll be transported to the National Capital Region for official ceremonies there, before he returns to Georgia when the official ceremonies take place in his hometown of Plains, Georgia, which will also be his final resting place. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Atlanta, Georgia.
President Carter entered his presidency at a time when there was much instability among many African nations. Viewers Philip Alexia talks with Moses Tessie, professor of political science and international relations at Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Tessie says Carter's loss is huge for the world and especially for Africa.
When he became president, the Cold War was at its height, and there was no area in the world that was manifested than in Southern Africa. You had the countries of South Africa fighting apartheid. You had in Rhodesia fighting against white minority rule. And then you had in Angola, the liberation movement there were also fighting. In fact, by the time he came to office, the MPLA, which was the main liberation movement there, had succeeded in gaining power through military means. And then you had Cuba sending some 36,000 troops or so to help support the Angolan government then under the MPLA of Agostinho Neto. And so when you had a combination of those factors taking place, you also had the Cold War, wherein you had the Soviet Union supporting one side of the conflict in Southern Africa, and then you had the United States and most of its NATO allies supporting the other side. So it was really not an easy phenomenon to look into. So Carter came in there, and he actually helped in influencing the negotiations that led to the fall of the white minority government in Rhodesia then, but today Zimbabwe.
The black citizens, who constitute 96% of the population of Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, never had a chance to consider nor to vote for or against the Constitution under which the elections were held.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of his involvement in Africa, he wanted to get involved really because he had said after his presidency that he had wished he had gotten more involved with the segregation issues and the racist issues going on here in the United States, in the South. And that's something that bothered him. certainly when he became governor of Georgia down here. So do you think that that had a pretty big effect on him in how he wanted to approach Africa, because he couldn't stand racism and he didn't feel like he did as much as he should have or gotten involved earlier with the issue in his life here in the United States?
Yeah, that's correct. Except that he, being the president of the United States, his involvement in Africa, he had that tension, the tension between supporting what is right, at the same time trying to pursue and essentially furthering U.S. foreign policy. And the furtherance of U.S. foreign policy meant essentially, as was the case then, supporting, in as much as he would not have liked that, supporting governments such as the apartheid regime in South Africa under various pretexts that they were fighting against communism, and that if they did not really stay in power, then communists would take over through the various liberation movements. So you had that tension taking place within Carter. But then he did morally condemn the South African regime, and also strategically understood that if he had not really, if he did not really take some actions to bring about black majority rule in Zimbabwe, then the so-called communist forces and so forth that were embedding the various liberation movements would actually succeed in a place like Zimbabwe, and then you have Zimbabwe under more or less Marxist leadership, as well as Angola. So you had those tensions in place. But there's one other cautionary note, which is that when he came to power, he brought in a good number of influential black Americans who tried to persuade him that indeed the struggle in Southern Africa was indeed, those whom they termed to be Marxists were indeed liberation fighters. And as a result, there was that big difference between them and the communists. They were mainly fighting for their civil rights, the same way that a lot of the civil rights leaders in the U.S. were fighting. So he came to see that. And you would also maybe understand that in the United Nations, somebody like Andrew Young, who was his UN ambassador, indeed took a lot of unconventional type stances in terms of behavior and so on and so forth. But in the end, Carter supported him, and he continued to be an influential leader. So indeed, his upbringing in the U.S. did help him significantly how he saw the African issues.
Well, that's Professor Moses Tetty speaking with viewers Philip Alexia from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump says he wants to slash government spending. It's not easy. We'll have a report. Stay with us.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
Well, in other news, the head of Uganda's military, who is also the son of long-standing President Yoweri Museveni, posted on X Sunday night that he wants to behead the country's most prominent opposition leader, Bobi Wine. Muhoozi Kainerugaba is widely believed to be the heir apparent to his father, who has governed Uganda since 1986. Kainerugaba routinely makes inflammatory posts on social media. China's top diplomat Wang Yi is visiting Africa, maintaining a 35-year-long tradition. He is quietly advancing Beijing's already sizable influence across the resource-rich continent as Europe's presence wanes and America's wavers. Foreign Minister Yi is visiting Namibia, Congo-Brazzaville, Chad, and Namibia. And the M23 rebels have seized strategic eastern town Masisi near the provincial capital Goma in the Democratic Republic of Congo, according to local politicians. The M23 has waged a renewed insurgency in eastern Congo since 2022. Congo and the United Nations accuse neighboring Rwanda of backing the group, which Rwanda has denied and says it is taking what it calls defensive measures. 19-year-old Charles Owino was killed by a gunshot to the head during a day of anti-government protests near Nairobi in July, according to an autopsy report seen by Reuters. Kenyan police, however, recorded his death as a road accident, according to his brother, citing the Moog logbook he was shown after he visually identified Owino's body. In a separate case, police say Shakil Obienge, 21, died in a road accident, according to his father, also citing an entry in the Moog logbook. But Obienge was shot in the neck, according to the government's own autopsy report conducted after his father visually identified his body. Obienge, who was also a protester, died the same day as Owino in the same Nairobi suburb of Kitengela, according to the report seen by Reuters. In Kenya, Moog logbooks record the cause of death reported by police when they bring in the bodies. Public pathologists usually only perform autopsies once bodies are identified by relatives.
He went to the parliament during demonstrations, and he was one of the Gen Zs who went there following the video which came up on the social media. And after that, the boy went missing.
It is required by law that where we are implicated as police, we don't investigate ourselves. It has to be done by an independent oversight authority. In this case, we have two. We can either have the Internal Affairs Unit, which is within the police, or the Oversight Authority, which is the IPOA. So it's not a yes or no answer.
During these 30 days, I was only fed once a day, a very small meal of ugali, that is corn, and cabbage, and a cup of tea in the morning, okay? I was allowed to take a shower once a week, every 7 days, but my handcuffs remained intact both day and night.
Reuters spoke to 3 police officers who work in a unit deployed during protests who say that Kenyan police at times mischaracterize deaths caused by officers as, quote, death by accident. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump wants to slash government spending. A proposed advisory commission called the Department of Government Efficiency is set to lead the effort. It's not a new concept. As VOA's Dora McCord reports, American leaders have tried to reduce the role of government almost since the beginning.
Billionaire businessman Elon Musk wants to slash $2 trillion in federal spending. He'll be co-head of the Department of Government Efficiency, a proposed Donald Trump Presidential Advisory Commission. It's not the first time a U.S. administration has pledged to cut government expenses.
Presidents have been talking in one way or another about downsizing or reducing the role of government since the founding of the Republic.
It started with America's third president, Thomas Jefferson, in the early 1800s. Jefferson eliminated some military and government jobs, temporarily lowering costs.
I am convinced that at least 4 million have been given employment.
In the 1930s, Franklin Delano Roosevelt expanded the federal workforce to cope with the Great Depression. Roosevelt's New Deal employed millions, providing relief for the poor while stimulating the economy. The jobs ended once the crisis was over.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan formed the Grace Commission, asking the group of about 150 business leaders to find ways to eliminate inefficiency.
President Reagan asked the Grace Commission to look at the government with an eye towards making it work more like a business.
But the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library website says that most of the recommendations, especially those requiring legislation from Congress, were never implemented. Still, some historians say Reagan succeeded in shifting the national conversation in favor of a smaller role for the federal government in solving public problems.
It was a fundamental sea change from the previous century, really, of expansion of the role of government in society.
In the 1990s, Bill Clinton worked to cut about 300,000 federal jobs, mostly through retirements and the outsourcing of services.
Certainly one of the more significant administrations in terms of reducing the role of government of the modern era.
During his first term, Donald Trump ordered a federal hiring freeze and other cuts. Now he wants his Department of Government Efficiency to finish the job. Some question the wisdom of taking a business approach to running the government.
When you're the government, you are responsible to the people, and your goal is not to make money. Your goal is to provide services and defend the nation. There's a lot of fraud and waste in the private sector, so I'm not that sure that business people are necessarily the best people to even find out, to even discover fraud and waste.
Trump and Musk are using one tool to get their point across that wasn't available during past efforts to cut government.
There can be a faster and more comprehensive response because of social media. Members of Congress tend to respond more to social media than the old-fashioned letters they used to get.
In many cases, Congress has to agree before any cuts can be made. Dora McQuarrie, VOA News, Washington.
Well, and that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.